You are listening to Wicked Psychotherapists, a podcast where two psychotherapists show you that taking care of and learning about mental health doesn't have to be wicked hot.
Hi, everyone. This is Tanya.
Hi, this is Erin, and welcome to Wicked Psychotherapists.
Yes, welcome. Welcome to our show. So today, a very interesting topic, a very relevant one that is discussing mental health and marijuana, Mary Jane, the devil's lettuce. I ran out of names.
Pot, weed,
whatever you know it by.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we thought we would talk about maybe some things just to consider, maybe some trends we're seeing in mental health. And the first thing that I really wanted to talk about was seeing an increase in discussion for intake sessions and just in sessions in general. I have seen personally a rise in that because I think of the possible destigmatization. So now it's more a part of the conversation during the intake. Have you seen something similar?
Yeah, I have. I noticed within the past, I think it might be the past 2 or 3 years, I've really seen an uptake. What is that word?
Uptick. It does sound like uptake, though. Uptick.
Yeah, uptick. Yeah. Well, I've seen an increase.
All right.
But it's a weird, English language is weird, isn't it?
English is weird.
But I've seen an uptick.
I think because we're talking about intakes, so we're saying it's uptick, but I keep thinking uptake too.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, so in my intake, I've seen an increase of people saying that they smoke pot or for either recreational purposes or to help with their anxiety or depression. And where in the past, like people might just put like, oh, used to, or, sometimes recreational. And then when I ask them, they will say it's like a daily usage or sometimes multiple times a day, where maybe when I say multiple, 7 or more, sometimes it's just like people like, oh, well, right before bed to help with anxiety, or if I know I'm doing this, go into the stressful thing. But I have really noticed an increase. I mean, especially here in Florida, it's not legal unless you have a medical card, but I've seen more and more people getting the medical card and using it for not just medical purposes, for recreational, for helping anxiety, and just all around. How about you?
It's tough to tell if it's kind of an uptick at this point or if it's that people, because of its destigmatization. It is legal in Massachusetts now. We have dispensaries and things like that. But it is hard to tell if maybe people just weren't talking about it because of its, legal status before this, or if it has been an increase. I do know that conversations around talking about its effects on mental health have led me to believe that some people are not fully aware that this is something that can affect your mental health. I think that's a big thing, that I've definitely seen an increase and a need to address. And I'm not coming in here. We're not coming in here saying, yay or nay to this. We're just bringing it as a thing to just be aware of, just like, how much water you drink every day, how much, alcohol you do intake, just to kind of one of those factors. And to just say that, a lot of the conversations I do have with people, if I do see, say, like daily use, if there's maybe unexplained mood changes or an increase in anxiety or depression, things like that, I might kind of wander into the territory of, well, how long have you been, smoking or, drinking similarly, right? But we're talking about the pot today, So, I was thinking of Flanders.
It's hard not to think of Ned Flanders. Like you just picture Ned Flanders waving his finger, telling you not to smoke, or like, I think, the devil's lettuce, as you said earlier.
Devil's lettuce. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and we certainly don't have that stance on it. We are trying to point out that it is a factor, and that's something we've noticed. I think that there is a gap in understanding its connection in mental health and possible usage, and just saying it could be a factor, right?
And also I think that people forget too that it can be a depressant. I know people think like, oh, well, it's helping alleviate my anxiety. It's making me feel less depressed. But just like with alcohol, sometimes you don't see it, like with alcohol, you might be like, oh my gosh, I had so much fun. I had fun with friends. I was drunk and whatever happened. Then 2 or 3 days later, you're like, wow, I'm super depressed. I don't know why. It's because alcohol is a depressant, much like, when you're smoking or gummies or however you're taking marijuana, it also can be a depressant on your body.
And a stimulant at the same time.
So it can be very confusing to
wonkier.
Yeah, it's very confusing to your system sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that is something that people don't necessarily understand about themselves. I think since it has become destigmatized, legalized in some places, it may be something that the rhetoric around it may be that, hey, this is something that I can use if I'm anxious. This is something that's completely harmless. This is something I've seen so-and-so do, in the same way that we say like, oh, a glass of wine to unwind. But in a similar vein, if you're reliant on that, if your mood is influenced by that, if you continue to drink or you continue to, kind of take more and more of that to rely on it, that could be an issue with your mental health, because you're then not utilizing coping skills, healthier ones that maybe could get you by. And then you're also you're becoming dependent on it, which again, I'm not saying no judgment in this conversation. It's something to consider.
Right.
It's something to think about.
And this podcast is not brought to you by Nancy Reagan's Dare or anything like that. This is
certainly not.
We're not saying that. We're not going to, do scare straight or anything, but we do want to talk about because we are therapists and we like to talk about how we see it's affected in our practice, what we see with clients. Also, we want to educate you a little bit about it. Because especially now we're hearing, all the positives of it and, from, a lot of people there could be, I mean, there are a lot of positives for some people who suffer from different medical ailments, but also if you do have anxiety or depression or other mental health issues, you also have to be aware, how is it going to interact with my medication I'm already prescribed if I'm taking medication? How does it interact if I drink? How does it interact, if I'm not of legal age? Whatever that is, if it's 21, 18, or, because that also affects, because our brains aren't fully developed, people, until we're 27 or so.
Yeah, which is completely different than what we thought from our generation, which was 21 or something. We're like, oh yeah, it's not until 21. So I think even 18 at one point. Then we're like, oh yeah, okay, 21, 22. And now it's 27. And now it's okay, pretty much 30.
Yeah, never. Yeah, it's just continuing. But and that's a big thing, because if you're thinking about your brain, and if it's not fully developed till you're 27, you really want to protect it.
Right. And because, in certain instances, you're kind of more vulnerable to things going on if you are still developing. Again, that's not to say, that either one of us are squeaky clean or anything like that. This is not a judgment. This is just something that I think gets overlooked a lot, because there has been, in order to destigmatize, marijuana, I think a lot of people have pointed out its benefits, which certainly there are. There can be. For some people, this has, so that they can, for medical conditions, for anxiety, for depression, for focus, for various things.
Yeah.
And no doubt. But it's the same as, you also, if you're starting to, kind of be a daily user, if that's something that helps you and you function well and there's not any issues with that, and you're just coming to therapy because, something happened, a recent event happened, an acute event, somebody passed away or something traumatic happened, that might be a different conversation versus there's this, kind of feeling of anxiety. I don't know where it's coming from. Whereas that may kind of come more into play with, what are some other substances, some other things at play, which can include other things like alcohol and,
and that's when, as therapists, that's when we would ask too, what do you do on a daily basis? Or, if you're using any substance, and we would ask this for anything, if you're taking anxiety medication, if you're drinking, if you're, whatever you're using. So we do ask how often. And, right now we're just talking about marijuana or, so that.
Right. So we're kind of focusing in on, the fact that I think that what shocks me is when I do talk to clients that are, and I work with adults. So these are all over the age of 21, actually, that, when I'm talking to them, if I start to kind of question, maybe it could be marijuana that's changing your mood, and they have a hard time seeing that because maybe they've been in the habit of doing this, or they've seen, this smoking as something that's the only thing that's going right. But there's other things going on. There's longer term effects that maybe they're not aware of. And that's always been something, I think that's something I would like to stress more with people, is knowing that, hey, it's not just the effects of when you're high. It's also, there's other stuff. It stays in your system, and there's other effects of that.
Yeah.
And being educated on that and understanding that, because that's really what it's the same with alcohol, right? It's really, knowing how you can interact with it, how it affects your behavior, how it affects your mood, and being, I think kind of self-educated in that, and being self-aware of that, and being educated in it is really important, And so I think when that's been really surprising to me, how little is understood because of this time that we're in, I think maybe young adults maybe kind of learned about this as less stigmatized than maybe our generation did. And then, of course, on and on before that. And so maybe there's not really any of the, yeah, sure, this is something, can be positive, but there's not an awareness of, maybe too much could not be positive, maybe depending on the things that, you ate, other things like you said that you've taken, that it could also cause some interactions. And so being aware of those things is really necessary. And we're saying that because I think sometimes people come in and they have experienced what I commonly see is an anxiety rebound. And they originally started smoking to deal with kind of everyday generalized anxiety.
Right.
But then something has built up in their system, or maybe their system is responding differently for whatever reason. There's something that's now creating anxiety from that. And that's something I see often.
Yeah.
Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I do. And then also with that, they're piling on something that they feel is helping their anxiety, but it could possibly be creating more anxiety because they're not learning coping mechanisms, and they're also not dealing with whatever the initial cause of what is causing the anxiety. They're not working on that. Instead, it's like, okay, well, let me just take this substance to filter out the feeling of anxiety, but it's still going to be there.
Right. Right. It's kind of the essentially numbing the emotions and not being able to manage it. And I think there are some instances where sometimes there isn't something you can do at that point. And maybe you just feel like I need to be able to continue through, for the next few days, and then maybe try to work on this. However, it usually doesn't happen that way. I think we tend to, as humans, we kind of develop behavioral patterns, and we go towards things that start to feel good. And I don't mean like, necessarily like an addiction, but something that's working for you, we would tend to stay with, rather than say, nope, wait, I got to stop and change direction. Because that's just a human pattern. That's just who we are. So that's where it can become a backslide effect, where you start to put it in the back of your mind, and you might start thinking, oh, this is just something like taking my multivitamin. This is just what I do. You know what I mean? Instead of evaluating, what is it really doing to me?
Well, much like when you said that, it makes me think of much like when people used to smoke cigarettes, and you see, I know people still do smoke cigarettes, but you don't see it as often. I mean, I grew up in a household where I felt like I felt like it was like one of those cartoon things where I had to push the cloud of smoke away because there was so much. I was the kid that probably smelled like cigarettes in first grade. But you often hear like when people are trying to quit smoking, or you heard when people quit smoking, like, well, what am I going to do when I talk on the phone? What am I going to do when I drive? What am I going to do drinking I'm just thinking of my mom. Like, what am I going to do if I'm drinking my coffee
and cigarettes?
Yeah. Yes. So what? It's like, well, how would you replace that behavior? So that's also it. So now we know, okay, so that behavior and that pattern's still there. So yes, you're still going to talk on the phone. You're still going to drive. You're still going to drink coffee, but you're going to replace it with something, or you busy your hands with something else. Or because I remember my mom tried quitting smoking a couple times. I'm like, okay, well, let me knit, or, clasp my hands, do a crossword puzzle, not while you're driving, but maybe I'm thinking coffee, but like,
that'd be pretty difficult.
But same with, like if you're trying to lower your consumption of pot, maybe what would you do? You might, well, what is causing my anxiety? What am I avoiding? What are some of my coping mechanisms? What is realistic to do right now? So I'm feeling a little anxious. Okay, I want to smoke, but I want to just save it. I'm trying to just save it for like maybe at night. So what can I do instead? Okay, so is it realistic that I can go for a walk? I can, is it early in the morning? Maybe I'll start my day with a meditation. Maybe I'll start keeping track of what I'm eating. Maybe I'm really consuming a lot of caffeine. Like we were laughing earlier, my dad drinks like 10 cups a day. That's a lot. I would be in a corner having a panic attack because that would be just so much caffeine. But some people tolerate caffeine differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really good to kind of, if you're able to track, what your day looks like when you do normally smoke, and then what could it look like if you didn't smoke that much. We're not saying not to smoke, but if it's at excessive and you are avoiding, feelings.
Yeah. This is something we might address, like, depending on, if it
was a client.
We might come in and say like, hey, what does that look like? Or like, hey, what are some of the feelings that, like, if I told you could not smoke or you couldn't take an edible tonight, what are some of the feelings that you are fearful of, or some of the things that you feel like you would have to kind of say, oh, this is when I know I need to take my edible. What comes up? And kind of placing yourself in there, because for some people it'd be behavioral. It could just be a routine. But then, that they just kind of settled into. And for some people, I think maybe, they just may not have dealt with how the emotions settle with them. And maybe they don't know why. And that's probably why they're coming to therapy, right? And that's what we're digging for. That's what we're looking for. And that's a good thing to come for, or to say, I don't have coping skills. Like, I never learned what coping skills were. Maybe they grew up in a house where this was normal, right?
Yeah, and things where you just use some sort of substance, whatever it is, to cope. It could be coffee, cigarettes, alcohol, exercise. Some people just use something, but they don't really want to try to go. They've never were taught to feel or to feel that discomfort or to figure out what it is. And we're not saying everyone should have panic attacks or big anxiety without help, but sometimes you have to figure out what the discomfort is and where it's coming from, and what, some of where the behaviors, maybe because there might be something that's leading up to that behavior or that feeling, or
right. And those thoughts. And absolutely. I think that's a good point, that you really might not know. You might not know the origin point. It might be something buried on top of another thing, on top of another thing. And pot is just something that is in that chain of it. And so you may have to dig. But again, this is all stuff we work out in therapy. This is therapy, is working through this. It's like digging through like the burial grounds of your mind, and kind of saying, okay, what's in there? And, and that's what we're saying, is just, there's an awareness that, somewhere in there, marijuana could be some sort of factor as to, if you say you use it a lot, or say when you use it, you have a very different feeling than normal, whatever it may be. It's just something that we would talk about. It's just something that we would say, hey, is this maybe not helping you out? Just like we would if, see that you're drinking 7, cocktails a night. That's probably an issue, or something. And I was going to say, or if you tell us your tolerance has gone up, but you're still feeling the same or worse, then that might be something that we're like, okay, well, how often are you? Why did you start? Is it still fun? Like if you started recreationally, or did you start to help with your anxiety? Is it still helping your anxiety? If the answer is no to both, then we also might be like, okay, let's go do a deep dive and try to figure out what else can work, or what else can we help you with? Yeah, this is really strange, but like lately I've been really thinking, like visualizing when I go through intakes, when I see, the written ones before I actually meet the client, I will look and I'll see those things, those answers as kind of like possible, maybe like assisters, like tools or something, when I'm asking about what's going on here, what are we looking at? And I say like, okay, that's one thing in there, right? Also amongst many other things that are asked in it. But we're just trying to point to the fact that it could possibly be something that's in the chain there that is maybe just needs to be considered more, or we need some more education on it, or we need like, another kind of awareness of it, of how it is affecting you, whether that be positively or negatively at various points.
Right.
So I think that's kind of what we really wanted to get out there, is just that it's because I really have just seen people that, and this is a total generalization, this is not everyone, of course, but I have seen definitely an increase in people not believing that this has anything to do with their mood or their behavior. And it's really, kind of, it needs to be known because it's not nothing. It's a chemical. I know that we are not saying it is the devil's lettuce anymore, but it is something that, it can affect your mood and your behaviors and your thoughts very much so. Just like anything else, just like alcohol, just like, and you need to know your tolerance. You need to know how it affects you to, I think, be healthy and to kind of continue to take that, however, in whatever amounts, if it's daily, if it's every once in a while, just like you would, kind of have to know, like, oh, what's your speed with drinking kind of thing,
and some people too, you also want to look at your history. And we're not saying, I know everyone's like, oh, well, there's a lot of talk of if you smoke, it leads you down a road to everything else. We're not saying that.
The gateway drug.
Yeah. But I am going to say, though, you want to look at also your family history. Like, what is your family history? And that goes for any medication your doctor's prescribed or anything you're on. Like, you look at your medical history.
Hopefully what your doctor is doing.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
You want to see, like, if there's substance abuse, if there's addiction, if there's how other people in your family have tolerated anything. So that's also stuff you want to look at and hopefully have an open conversation with your doctor too, if you do.
Yeah, because it really, it is something really important that, we just don't know how every drug in the world interacts with different systems. And that's the reality of it. Everybody's system is very different. And you are responsible for that. It's not that, oh, this is legal, so it's fine for everyone. I think that there in some young people, and maybe I've even seen it in some adults, that they kind of have that thinking. And it's like, well, you wouldn't go and smoke and then go, drive around and, kind of, be like, oh, hey, I'm going to go, I don't know, drive, and drink, a 40 or whatever, kind of do that. Right. Like, it's the same. So you really just have to be aware of how much does this impair me? What can I do? What's the purpose of this? And, if some people, like I've had some people feel like if I analyze, this is not something that really is relaxing to me anymore.
Oh, okay.
And
so that's a big thing. Yeah.
Right. That's a gateway. Not a gateway. That's a bridge to something. Right. That's like kind of saying, oh, well, maybe there is something you don't want to look at. Maybe and not having anything to do with marijuana itself, but maybe saying, I don't want to be present for these things right now. Maybe I am unhappy and I don't want to be present for work. I don't want to be present around my family because I'm really unhappy, and that's a definite thing we can address.
Yeah. And then if they are telling you, I'm not really liking the way I feel, or it's not really giving me the same effect, but they keep doing it. So then it's become like a habit, a ritual that maybe they're going to be happy that you addressed it. So then it could be like, wow, maybe this is something that I might want to have reduced in my life, or maybe eliminated or thought about differently, or I'm glad we're talking about it.
Yeah. That's really if anything, that's what we just want you to take from that conversation, is because of course there's a little bit of defensiveness sometimes in people if we do approach this, because it is so newly kind of, I think, legalized and destigmatized that some people may kind of be like, oh, are they trying to say I'm an addict, or am I trying to say this? We're not. We're just trying to see, where does this fit in the puzzle piece? Where is it, kind of in the chain that might be affecting you? And that's something that really should be for your providers in general, right? It's kind of a general rule of thumb,
right,
to talk about, to have that discussion.
Yeah, because it's not, because a lot of times when we're talking with clients, it's not, it's just in my head. I just started thinking of like the old Cheech and Chong movies. Like, like up in smoke and stuff, but it's not.
I thought of the mustache.
Oh my God. But that's what you picture sometimes, that, or, oh gosh, I'm thinking of some other movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, like just the cloud of smoke with the cars and stuff like that. But people, like a lot of times that people were thinking, like, they're like, okay, well, I'm not doing that. I'm just, having a gummy, or I'm just doing this, or I'm, have.
Right. That's a good point.
Vaping.
That's a really good point. It's like not quite the association of like being like up in smoke, right? And like the big fat joint and like, kind of that type of thing. Like it may be just like, oh, I'm just doing something to help my mood, because sometimes it can be kind of talked about, I think, nowadays in just that regard. or like, oh, this is just to help me relax,
Right.
and like, I've definitely heard like, I popped a gummy and I just kind of, unwind, was just unwinding, which is like, okay, I've heard,
Yeah.
I have a glass of wine and I unwind too. And that may or may not be a something, right? Depending on what the issue is. And I kind of wanted to shift it. You actually just had me thinking about, because we're from, a pretty similar generation. And, so I was just thinking, when you were growing up, what was your association with marijuana? Like, what was your kind of like Fast Times at Ridgemont High? Like, was it like Sean Penn smoking, like Up in Smoke, like kind of surfer dude? He was in that, right? Oh my God, am I remembering that wrong?
Sean Penn. And then there was
Okay.
like, I remember that one movie. It was like in like the 90s or something, but it was set for the 70s. It was just like a bunch of teenagers and they're just smoking the whole time. Dazed and Confused.
Look at that.
I remember going and seeing that quite a few times with friends from high school. And that was kind of I think that was the movie of our time. I mean, I don't even know when it was out. 93.
So like early 90s.
Yeah. So 93, I think. So I remember going to see that a couple times in high school and stuff and just being like, even though it was supposed to be set in the 70s, it felt very, all right, this is, like, because I don't know, it felt like it was, no, I don't want to say it was socially acceptable, but it's high school. Like some people view things differently. And so, but yeah, I do remember Cheech and Chong felt very insane. Like that is so ridiculous, well, just funny. Yeah, just funny. But yeah, I remember Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Dazed and Confused felt a little more realistic.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like those types of movies. I was trying to think of a particular movie and I can't quite think of one, but like definitely, just kind of how it was represented in movies and in shows and like series and things like that.
Yeah.
It just seemed like the things that, kids do to experiment and just kind of, I don't know, they were just, but it was also, when I was in high school, it was kind of like the group of like, the potheads, right? Like those were you always could tell they always reeked of smoke. They had the big, kind of baggy jeans and, they just kind of always were like, what? And maybe
you wonder
like a set of glasses or something.
And you wonder where were the teachers? Like how did the teachers not know? Or do they not care? Because that was like my high school was an open, like we had an open campus. So we even had like a cigarette smoking section. And that's how old I am. No, but like, how did the teachers not know? Like, okay, you smell like pot today, or your eyes are bloodshot, or do they not care?
I think they caught on. They have so many kids. They're just like, as long as they're not dying, like I'm good. That's kind of their own stuff. That's their extracurricular, They kind of couldn't really focus on that.
Yeah.
Unless like something was, because kids are going to be kids, like I'm not saying that's the way it is now.
No, but yeah.
I think it's more kind of like people, I don't know. I'm not that in touch with youth all that much, but I think that it's very much like the movies I see and the general sense that I get with like, kind of just like how it's portrayed in like, media and stuff like that is that it's kind of more just like, it's nothing, I just, I popped a gummy or like people are just smoking and it's just like, that's just how it is, like smoking pot,
it's not, but it also doesn't seem, you don't see people passing, like in movies and stuff like that. They're not sitting on a beach passing a joint or smoking the bong or whatever. So it's less communal.
I feel like it's a little different in like where they used to represent like people who smoke pot as like, like they're so stupid and like kind of, like they're really kind of dumb. They're slackers and things like that. And like nowadays, I think it's just kind of more part of like your teacher could be popping a gummy at night kind of thing. I'm not saying they are. I'm just saying that. Okay, teachers, don't get offended.
No slander. Yeah, no, it is. It is more, especially now where it's legal in some states and some people have prescriptions. It is feeling like it's more socially acceptable where it's not stigmatized as, it's such a pothead. But it's more, okay, well, they need it. It's medicinal. But it's also, again, like we said earlier, it can still, like depend on what you're using it for and how often you're using it. It's not always just it might not always be just alleviating your anxiety or whatever you're there for.
Yeah. Educating yourself on the strains and things like that and like where it's, kind of coming from. And you can, at the dispensary, they usually do have someone who's knowledgeable and can explain that to you, kind of thing. Yeah. But I mean, so I think that there definitely has been a shift in that, but there's, in all shifts, there's just things to consider and to think about. And we just noticed that to just bring up
Yeah, we've noticed that there's been an increase. I mean, I know, and it's funny, like looking back when I was a kid or whatever, teen or young adult, I think that if I were to have told my therapist, yeah, I smoke or I do this or I smoke 7 times a day, I think it would have been definitely approached differently than it would be today.
Right. Right. It was kind of more like you can't have an open conversation about that. I even remember when I first started doing therapy, like, over a decade ago, it was even back then, like even a
Wow.
decade back, it was, this is kind of on the edge, kind of thing. And I don't know if like this is something, if the kid's under a certain age, do I report kind of thing?
Yeah.
And, kind of questioning
Yeah.
that.
I remember I used to see teens when we first graduated. I was like, okay, I'm going, and I was like, oh, what do I do? Like I remember wondering, like, am I supposed to say anything or just let them talk about it? It felt so narky, but I didn't say, it's like then I talked to our professors or whoever, it's weird. It's a weird area, but now it's like, okay, different. It's a different world. I don't see teens anymore. I learned my lesson. I not learned my lesson, but I just decided I like adults.
You can say it. I did.
Yeah.
I learned my lesson from that.
Yeah. I decided, that's the nice thing too about being a baby therapist. When you first start, you get to realize who you want to see. And
right.
So
so
now
kind of what area interests you.
Yeah. So now I see adults and it's been like a decade or so. And, now, the shift of the marijuana topic has changed too and how we feel about it and stuff. And it's funny. It's a weird world, isn't it? It's weird.
It is.
I think about when I was younger going to like legalization rallies and stuff like that. It's just like a different world. I mean, like it's just, I don't know. It's just weird. It's weird. I feel like I'm like 90 or something like that now, but it's just really, it's weird.
It's like we've lived through like shifts and movements, and that's something, that's something that like people actually in society don't understand. Like, some young people have not seen yet, and that you remember that.
Yeah,
like,
I do. I mean, I remember going to quite a few in Boston and stuff and just thinking that this was the coolest thing and just imagine this will never happen. What a world. Like just
right. Yeah. I remember thinking that too. Like, oh my God, this is like, and when it started to become closer and closer, I was like, I never knew this day would come in my lifetime. It was just so bizarre. It's almost surreal. And so it's, kind of just to reflect on that, just to give a perspective of a couple of oldies here, that's how we feel.
Yeah. I mean, like, so that also, it is. I mean, like, I understand. I mean, like, I understand how great it is that you're able to go to your doctor. You are able to, but it also, we want you to be safe and we want to make sure that you're given the right coping mechanism and everything too.
Right. Because that essentially is therapy, is, trying to figure out these things and to be able to guide yourself towards something that, isn't working, towards something that could be better for you. And so that's the whole purpose of it. And so this is just one part of it that we thought, maybe could be highlighted for today and could be discussed openly. And we, it's kind of fun to jump down that route and think about it from our perspective when we were younger, because I'd forgotten some of those things.
Yeah, and I always feel like I need to watch Fast Times at Ridgemont High. I used to think Sean Penn was so cute in that movie.
Me too. Oh my gosh, loved him. Yeah.
Him, and it's funny, and that must be why, like him and Owen Wilson, I like their little broken noses. I don't know.
Yeah, Owen Wilson had to grow on me, but like I saw.
We like bad actors.
We do. It's a requirement for them. They're just so cute, Yes, and so. Looks like we can kind of close this one out, and we hope you enjoyed this talk. Please let us know if you have any comments or anything that you just want to fill in, anything that you feel like maybe we didn't add enough in, or to clarify something, because we're always open to feedback and comments, whatever you think. We're looking
if we offended you by the dare comments, we apologize.
I don't think anyone's offended. Except for Sheldon on Young Sheldon. And Sheldon on Big Bang Theory.
Yeah.
He talks about dare.
Does he? Oh,
he signed the pledge. He takes it very seriously. Anyways,
Young Sheldon, I have to watch Young Sheldon. I know it's like over, but I've never seen it.
It's really funny. It's actually the last season coming up like this week, like starts this week. And my husband and I got into it for some reason. I don't know why. I was like, I'm not going to like this show. And just like Big Bang Theory, I'm like hooked on it.
Yeah,
So,
my dad
yeah.
always talks. That's like my dad's favorite show right now. He always says like how much I'm like, really? Because my
It's
dad, I don't think
funny.
my dad watched Big Bang Theory, but he loves Young Sheldon.
Yeah, you can still really like it and like appreciate that. Kid actors are, I mean, all of them are amazing, but the kid actors are like, even from a young age when they start, they're like 6, the littlest ones,
Wow.
the twins or whatever. And they are amazing. Like they're really good. I just can't like, I'm like, oh wow. I remember when
Yeah.
kid actors were like, would look at the camera and laugh and like sort of blur out their line because they just like were kids and they can't really
Yeah.
act. But
Like
now it's like,
like the Full House
wow.
people. Yeah.
Yeah, the Full House twins, yeah. But yeah, so leave us a review. It always helps. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at Wicked Psychotherapists. On Facebook, we are The Wicked Psychotherapists. Subscribe. Helps us out.
Yeah. Like, so tell your friends and
friends.
yeah. And please, yeah. And if there are, we always ask, if there's anything you want us to talk about in the future, let us know. We're always open.
Yep, we are. We really like that feedback. And yeah, don't forget, stay wicked.
And keep your mind well.
So long, folks.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye, guys.